somebody just got shot. I think we might have to go back over there.
Me and my family were outside celebrating the birthday of my uncle when shots were fired.
I remember me telling the nurse that if I pass away, just tell my mom it's not her fault.
This is us at Epcot. And Eric, 10 months later, would be in prison for the rest of his life. I always call that my last happy moment.
I'll never be over this. Never, 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 never be over this.
I just realized my friend wasn't there. I know she would have enjoyed that moment, graduating.
Though she is gone, she will never be forgotten.
Chicago, if you make it here, you tough. You make it here, you make it anywhere. For over 20 years, I was a part of the problem. Now I'm trying to be part of the solution.
What if it were your child that committed the offense? How would you want your child to be treated?
My goal is to make it that I'd never be at that low that I was when I was down.
I wish my story would touch everybody who thinks about picking up a gun.
If we don't mentor him and try to steer him the right way, it's a matter of time before he pick the gun up.
I know I'm not alone. There's many of us out here who want to find a way to begin their healing process.
Where is it gonna stop?
I don't know, bro. I don't know.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tim Russell, Vice President, Community Engagement and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for WTTW and WFMT, and welcome to today's Chicago Tonight Voices, a WTTW News community conversation. WTTW is committed to producing and presenting trusted best-in-class content fueled by distinctly Chicago sensibility. WTTW is essential to public discourse. We leverage PBS documentaries, WTTW original news content, digital series to surface and spotlight people, ideas, and stories behind the headlines. We have served as Chicago's window to the world, and our purpose is to enrich lives, engage communities, and inspire exploration. The issue of gun violence is not a Chicago or a big city issue, but an American issue. Our nation is facing an epidemic of gun violence and mass killings that are devastating families, ripping apart communities, and forcing all of us to question our own safety. You have just watched a trailer to WTTW's award-winning Firsthand Gun Violence digital series, in which we put a human face on the impact of gun violence have on individuals, the city, and our region through a documentary series, expert talks, text and visual journalism, and discussion guide. You can find this content on our website at wttw.com/firsthand. Tonight's conversation could not be more timely. On the heels of the recent shootings in Highland Park, Buffalo, Uvalde, and the murder of Chicagoan Sakura Hurd, 17, who was looking forward to the future after earning a full ride scholarship to Southern Illinois University, with her departure for college just a few weeks away. In the wake of the Supreme Court most significant ruling on guns in a decade, our city, region, and country remains deeply divided over how to address gun violence. Before we get things started, I'd like to extend a very special thanks to our supporters of this project, who you can see listed here. Welcome Chicago Tonight correspondent Joanna Hernandez, who will moderate this important conversation.
Hello and welcome to Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices, a WTTW news community conversation. Thank you for spending your evening with us. I'm Joanna Hernandez. Now, gun violence in America has been gradually rising to the extent that in 2020, gun violence surpassed car crashes as the leading cause of death for American children and adolescents. One contributing factor is the massive number of guns in the country. Tonight, we'll take a look at what this means locally and nationally, and the work that people are doing in our community. Now, you're all in listen mode only, but that doesn't mean you can't be part of the conversation. We want to hear from you. So please chime in on the chat function with your questions and comments. I'll sure be to share them with our guests. Now, let's start by introducing them. Now, first, we have Tonya D. Woods. She is executive director of the Westside Justice Center, a Chicago-based legal aid organization that seeks to empower individuals and communities to obtain greater accountability and access to systems of justice. Under Wood's leadership, the nonprofit organization has helped hundreds of clients, conducted dozens of workshops, and engaged with thousands of community members since 2016. Now, next we have Lisette Guillen. In 2012, Ms. Guillen began producing Case Files Chicago. This television show works as a tool to help law enforcement agencies solve homicide cases and bring justice for families who have lost loved ones to violence. In between the show seasons, Ms. Guillen works with the Hale Media on true crime documentaries. Now, last, we have Sergeant Jermaine Harris. He is a community policing sergeant with the Chicago Police Department, where he develops community-based violence prevention strategies involving law enforcement and nonprofit partners. Harris is a co-founder and advisory board chair of the Community Leadership Fellows, and he is also a co-founder of Chicago Westside Police and Youth Sports Conference. Now, in 2019, Sergeant Harris delivered a talk as part of the WTTW's Firsthand Gun Violence series, in which he explored the vital role police officers can play in their communities and how listening can prevent violence from happening in the first place. Let's hear a clip of what he said.
Children can teach us so much. I want to share an example of a typical conversation between my nephew. This is going to hit close to home for a lot of us. Okay, Dallas. All right, Sam, put the phone away.
But why?
It's because you have to go to bed.
But why?
Because it's a school night.
But why?
Because you have to get an education.
But why?
If you get a good education, you can get a good job.
But why?
A cute kid, right? Now, the parents in the room might not think that's so cute. That routine will get old very quickly. That's my nephew Dallas making his screen debut. I chose to lead with that video to highlight the inquisitive nature of children and how sometimes as adults and leaders, we move away from that tendency to ask questions. But by reverting to our toddler selves, we can actually transform communities. Asking why is powerful. Understanding the driving forces behind violence allow us to better create strategies to prevent it. When a police officer asks a person caught with a gun, why do you feel the need to carry a weapon? Or asking a teen with a gang affiliation, why did you join a gang? Those answers provide solutions to problems. And then, by attacking the reasons that create the environments for violence involvement, we in turn create long-term crime prevention strategies. So thank you, Dallas, for that inspiration. I've been a Chicago police officer since 2002, spending my entire career on the South and West Side communities of Garfield Park, Inglewood, and now Austin. You must understand that Austin is very special to me. I grew up on the very streets that I now patrol, so this job is personal. I see my mom, my son, myself, and every person I encounter. And for that reason, I'm driven to uncover the causal factors of violence so that the repeated cycles of murder, incarceration, and substance abuse do not continue to consume my neighborhood. My current role is the community policing sergeant for the 15th district in the Austin community. One of the primary goals of this office is to strengthen the relationships between police and community. I often see myself as an advocate in that role. And because of the non-traditional paths that we take, people ask me all the time whether or not I worked for a nonprofit in my previous job. But I really consider that a compliment, because being able to connect with the residents and the stakeholders that we serve ensures that the directions we go are always in line with the needs of the community. This approach to crime prevention aligns strongly with theories of social justice. Now, listen, buckle in, okay? Because what I'm about to say is going to attack the most prevalent narratives about police in the Black community. In the 15th District Community Policing Strategy, we have adopted a model in which social justice is our crime prevention strategy. The 4 core principles of social justice are equity, access, participation, and rights. And without fail, the answers to the why questions revert back to one of those core principles.
And Sergeant Harris, I want to start with you. Now, that was back in 2019. Now, talk to me a little bit about the work that's happened since then.
Yeah, I think so first off, Joanna, hey, great to see you again. And always a pleasure to have an opportunity to share with the WTTW community. But just thinking about that progress, at that point, I had been a few years into my role in community policing. And this idea around using social justice and addressing access and equity issues to really to prevent violence from happening in the first place. It was something we wanted to build a lot of momentum around, specifically around the partnerships that were created. And so a couple of initiatives were really grown out of that. You mentioned during my bio, the Chicago Westside Police and Youth Sports Conference, but also came out of that was community response teams. It was really this idea around building partnerships with our community partners that were best equipped to really address a lot of those root cause issues, because you have to understand as police, right, we carry certain tools on our belts, and on those, right, they're not designed to create, to build, to heal, right, the tools that we're equipped with. So it requires us to make a lot of friends in community that are best equipped for that. And so in that process, we've been able to really create strong relationships, particularly in the Austin community. And as we saw so many major increases in violence, not just here in Chicago, but across the nation, what was able to happen in a lot of the progress that's going on in the 15th district, because of that foundation, right, within those community partnerships, those trends are being reversed, right? And they're experiencing one of the least violent summers in the history of Chicago that's happening in Austin. It's really rooted in those partnerships and that two-pronged approach of effective law enforcement combined with true community partnerships.
And your work centers a lot with the youth. I want to play a clip. I actually interviewed you last summer, and I interviewed some of the kids and who were participating in Westside Sports. See if we can take a look at that. You know, how has that program, you know, you spoke about it a little bit. You know, do you see that more kids are joining the program?
Yeah, so we're looking at this process. So we're kind of checking out some stuff that was going on last season, and so we understand the pandemic, right? The impact that had on youth programming, on our ability to connect. So the great thing about Chicago Westside Sports was that it was really asset-based and built in community. So during the pandemic, because baseball is this naturally socially distant sport, we were able to operate a complete season during the pandemic that really utilized so many of the partners that lived right in those areas of those parks and within community. And so just great opportunity to continue to build. A very successful season is actually wrapping up within the next couple of weeks. We're in the playoffs. Our teams are actually participating in a major citywide tournament at UIC this weekend. Our 14-year-olds are going to be playing. So it's just been a really great opportunity to see our police officers building these relationships over these years, right? We started this program in 2018 and 2019. So now we're seeing kids who've grown up, right, with these police officers, and the relationships are just an unbelievable thing. And we're really excited about the opportunity to continue to grow.
And, you know, Tonya, I want to go to you. What were your thoughts on what Sergeant Harris said?
Well, certainly I'm encouraged when I see a law enforcement officer seem to have a grasp of something more than just behavior and then addressing behavior on a short term. So to hear you talk about root causes, I'm fond of saying that, you know, we are looking often for short-term and easy to find fixes to a multi-generational, centuries-old problem. And so why would we expect a solution to come in a day to a problem that's been created over time? And so, you know, to hear someone within the rank and file of law enforcement speak about root causes is certainly encouraging. And, you know, I have some thoughts about how, you know, folks can share that message within their own ranks, because oftentimes, you know, the messenger needs to come from within, from someone with whom they can trust and understand and find credible. And so certainly we wish there were more folks like you.
And Tonya, can you just share with us more about your work at Westside Justice Center?
Sure. So taking that same, piggybacking off of my colleague, I'm too from the West Side. So it's a privilege to be able to serve and work in the community that I grew up in. I too spent many years in Austin, as well as my formative years in K-Town. So the Westside Justice Center is a uniquely situated community-based, holistic legal aid, trauma-informed legal aid clinic and legal service clinic on Chicago's West Side in East Garfield Park at the corner of California and Harrison. And that's where we're all hanging out there over at California and Harrison. The unique thing about the services that we offer is that we are community-based. And so what does that mean? That means that people from the community get an opportunity to receive services from people who look like them, people who come from the communities that they come from the top to the bottom. So if you have an organization like ours, which was formed by activists, former civic leaders, attorneys, business people, then the investment is different. And then eventually the outcomes hopefully will be different. Time has yet to judge us on that. But in the 6 short years that we've been on that corner, we've been able to affect and impact and transform, hopefully, the lives of individuals, but more importantly, of families and of communities by providing legal services that, preserve the dignity and respect of individuals in a place that people can feel good about going to, from people who look like them, steeped in a tradition that has in no small part, a large part to do with the Black Panther Party and the 10-point plan and mutual aid and all the buzzwords that we think about now that really have to do with self-sufficiency, building and scaffolding the capacity that we know we already have, and repowering our community so that we can maintain self-sufficiency in a way that supports us all.
And this is also help for people who can't speak English.
Absolutely. So at the Westside Justice Center, we have the unique ability to also be in partnership with the Resurrection Project in being the program administrators of a statewide program called Illinois Access to Justice. And you saw some of us participating in that. That is a one of its kind here in the state of Illinois, certainly on this scale, Black-Brown coalition, where factions are not fighting over the same scarce resources, but to my colleague's point, an assets-based approach that says there is enough. There are enough resources. We all pay taxes in some form or another, whether it's the grocery store or income taxes or what have you, in order to shake loose and free those dollars and reinvest them in the communities that need them the most. So Illinois Access to Justice is bipartisan, as I mentioned before, Black-Brown, led by women, that seeks to put legal services, education, and information in the hands of the people, delivered by the people and funded by the state. That is government for the people and by the people. If I've seen it anywhere, I see it there.
All right, and Lisette, you work alongside the police department and families who have lost family members who are seeking justice for their loved ones. And I want to ask you, what is your take on the city's effort to address, gun violence?
I have a lot to say on this topic. Obviously, time is short, but I do like hearing about the resources that Tonya just spoke about. Unfortunately, we haven't seen very many spread out. Now, recently, I know that the state has released millions of dollars for anti-violence initiatives, but I would like to see that go into some of those smaller, the smaller organizations, the ones that are on the ground doing boots on the ground work, deep into the community type stuff. I really do admire organizations like Tonya's and of course the work that of course Jermaine is doing, but would love to see some of those dollars go into some of the smaller organizations, just because they are really a lot of times the first to respond.
So we're talking here about $250 million.
Yes,
that's
a lot of money. Yes.
And to Lisette's point, that is one of the strengths of a network like Illinois Access to Justice, which is actually a coalition of 67 community-based organizations from Chicago to Carbondale, organizations that would not otherwise be able to take advantage of state dollars, right? Small organizations that, might have 2 to 5 employees, if that many, but now have access to those dollars that oftentimes are blocked because of the, as Jermaine pointed out, not-for-profit industrial complex, right? That seeks to often create barriers where there were none and to keep us back from accessing the resources that we so desperately need. And there needs to be an Illinois Access to Justice in every space, in every state.
And those are some of the barriers that I keep hearing when I go out and interview those small grassroots organizations. I mean, I just interviewed a couple who decided to buy a lot right in their backyard and to make it into a resource garden, an urban garden, to start bringing people in and teaching them about how to grow food as a way of combating violence and bringing people together. But one of their main things was we are struggling to find funds.
Yes. And I think too, there's such an imbalance. You'll have some organizations that have millions on hand, and then you've got smaller organizations that are, digging, coins out of their, couch cushions just to print posters for rallies or events or vigils. So there is such a huge difference in where this money is being put.
Now, I want to take it back a little bit, Tonya. I want to go to you. What were your first thoughts when you heard the news of the Supreme Court decision to allow people to carry firearms outside of their homes for self-defense?
So this is a conversation that's been going along for a long time in the Black community about the right to quote unquote bear arms peacefully. Oftentimes when we are the ones that are bearing the arms, we are also the ones that are oppressed and caged and incarcerated for bearing arms. And so there's been this disparity for a long time in this country. Again, I invoke the name of the Black Panther Party. In large part, their mission, among many other things, was to bear witness to some of that disparity, which oftentimes happened because, law enforcement were wielding weapons that, we had a lawful right to wield as well, but we were often then incarcerated and arrested for. So my initial thoughts to answer your question are like, but I'm always looking for the other shoe to drop. This also came at the same time that the Roe v. Wade and other decisions that are in the hopper or in the queue that we have yet to see. So I am not one to often jump up and down with either excitement or dismay at what I see coming out of the Supreme Court, but try to look at the totality of the decisions that are coming from the court, the people who are sitting on the court, and then trying to connect the dots for people like you and I, but more importantly, for others who do not have the same level of education or understanding or appreciation for what the connection between their vote, their engagement, and their activity is to those Supreme Court decisions, which seem so very far away. So there are organizations and groups who are encouraging Black and brown people to seek out, get your FOID card, register your firearm so that we can actually test some of these laws to see if they're actually going to work in the blind eye of justice as they are supposed to, or if they are going to tip in favor of the status quo and act in disparity against Black and brown people. So with that, I say my short answer is I'm waiting to see.
Waiting to see. Lisette, what are your thoughts on it?
I think that would also depend on how those weapons are going to be used. So, right now, I don't, and Jermaine, please jump in. A lot of the people committing crimes aren't getting those FOID cards. They're not doing that. They're not, getting them, registered. So there's gonna be a long pause before we can even get there, because we do have people walking around that are just getting these guns illegally, so they're not being registered. Or if they are, then what do they do after? Are they doing protection, what it's made for, or are they doing harm? So I think that's something that we will have to look at in the future.
And Jermaine, I'm sure you have a different perspective. Could you share a little bit?
Yeah, so first, basically, just in understanding Second Amendment protections, like I'm a police officer and a Marine, right? Understanding our constitutional protections as well as constitutional policing, I'm always going to be in favor of any American exercising their rights. But here's an important thing to understand about the concept, the idea of guns, is specifically the proliferation of guns that are in our communities. Already this year, CPD's already recovered over 6,000 guns on the streets. And we have some of the best gun laws with restrictions, right, in the country, but our weapons are coming from other states, right? Indiana, Wisconsin, and spaces where the laws are a lot more lax. And here to understand, it kind of goes back to this idea of asking why and understanding. I have conversations with young men who are out who carry weapons, and really the idea that we all want to feel safe, and we all need this idea of safety. Even as you talk about, quote unquote, our law-abiding citizens, right? The words that's used.
is that this idea that this gun provides this sense of security and safety, and those are our basic needs. And the same thing applies to an individual who, regardless, right, of status or socioeconomic conditions. But if we're made to believe that that safety comes through the use of a gun, we're following and setting ourselves up for a lot of damage and a lot of issues, because the act of violence is always a culmination of a lot of things that go on into a person's life. If we start to understand the effects of adverse childhood experiences, we understand the effects of trauma, we understand the effects that mental health, mental illness has on individuals. And to think as if we're going to focus then on that endpoint, the gun itself, focus on the violent act itself, we're ignoring a lot of the things that create the environments where we're having these violence issues. So I think it has to happen both.
Or mental health.
But up to
including
the fact that, including Jermaine, the fact that many of the people that we're talking about who are in our own families, the violence is being perpetrated in many ways by the carceral institution and by law enforcement. So you are learning as a young person on the streets that the way to keep law and order is to do so through violent means. And so when those same violent means are then put back into that situation, only from the other side, now it is vilified and criminalized. So I would pose that, it can't be okay for some of us to use violence as a way to keep law and order, but it's not okay for the others of us to use violence as a way to seemingly protect what we think we are protecting, right? Or to, whether it's a way of life, maybe it's my set, maybe it's my girl, whatever the reasons are. So I am a little bit, weary of when we talk about trauma and mental health and broken families, as if there's not all this other stuff also causing trauma, right? So sure, there are broken families, of course. There are individuals who are victims of abuse of all kinds. There are also people who are suffering from poverty and lack of education and lack of opportunity, which are systemic causes and traumas. So, we've got to also widen that conversation to say, we cannot talk double-sided, out of both sides of our, that it's okay to wield violence in one instance and wield it heavily, right? But then when we're using it another way, we say it's wrong here. So we've got to reckon with, in some ways, how we choose to address dispute resolution, what are alternatives without vilifying, alternatives to incarceration as if it's being soft on crime, or we're not actually interested in public safety, and really begin to have some very expansive and innovative conversations, and not kind of just rely on, Johnny came from a broken home and his mama was a drug addict kind of conversation. Right?
Yeah, I think
there's not a week that doesn't go by. I'm not driving my car and I see two officers pulling over two young Black guys. I see it every week. And then I pull over my car to make sure that their rights are not being, overtaken, or that they have an opportunity to make sure that they're safe, right?
And Tonya, what's that middle ground for you?
So it's conversations like this, right? It's actually coming to the table with real solutions and not finger pointing. It's getting people who actually have the ability to affect change, shape policy, and reallocate resources in the room, and not have them be 2-3 levels away from the decision-making process. Because how much of the budget does Jermaine control at CBT, right? How much of the budget do I control at the state of Illinois? How much does the Lisette control? Lisette said it best. It's the small grassroots organizations that need the resources, because they're right there on the front lines. So that's the middle ground for me, is to, it's 2022 now. We've been talking about this. When was your video? 2019?
2019.
We're saying the same stuff now for 3 years.
Yeah. And I think also,
go ahead. Sorry, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, Joanna, I also see that, as we become more lax in punishment on crime, it seems like, and we all seen it, the hands are tied of the police department. They've really put in some restraints on them lately. And since they began doing that, we've started seeing a lot more crime and violence happening. So there's a lot of questions that are on that end. I think that not just this group has that are talking, but also the people. The people are asking that question.
Now, I want to change it to a different law, Harris. I want to talk about, Illinois passed the red flag law back in 2019. It allows family members to petition courts to temporarily remove firearms from individuals who pose a danger to themselves or others. In your opinion, has this law been effective in our city?
Yeah, so, it's an important thing, right, that we understand those who are closest to us, right, those who are closest to an individual, those who understand more of the story and more of the situation are vital and important parts of a process, right? The inclusive nature of thinking of community, right? Specifically, I know what this is like directly connected to family, but when we understand situations, it's not uncommon, right, for us to know of someone in a particular neighborhood or community or any individual to understand their behaviors and the things that are going on. But here's some of what the challenges become is that within a law, there's restrictions and there's a framework, but our human existence and our lives are complex and complicated, right? So there are certain things in certain situations where we saw within Highland, right, with the individual who didn't hit the flags, right? It wasn't that it wouldn't have been, his guns wouldn't have been taken because of the particular circumstances. But I think it really gets into that point of, Tonya talks about this idea about just accountability. If we only depend upon that on government, or if we only see that as a way that it must be mandated or sanctioned, right, for within our safeties, I think we come up really short on the potential of what we're able to do with communities. And it really gets into the idea too that was mentioned too, Lisette and Tonya, about this restorative process, right? And it's one of those important things within grassroots organizations, within individuals that work directly in community to create these restorative processes. I've seen amazing work done by, I'm wearing a shirt here from Boxing Negativity. Coach Derek Brown and his organization does amazing work within restorative practices. And this process of understanding the harm that was done to a person or that happened to a person in those situations, how do we deal with that environment versus simply attacking the individual person, the individual act, that's not going to create the systemic change that's needed. And so I think really that process of us starting to think about how to effectively utilize laws and these different ways to create safety in our community, I think we're always going to come up short in some way because the process is so comprehensive and it's so valuable to have that voice of community members, that voice of people who are close that might not have the legal authority, but has the ability because of their lived experiences or because of their understanding of situations. So I'm always going to want more when it comes into the process of us coming together and acting as a community that go beyond the limitations of just a law or a policy. So.
And Harris, go ahead, Lisette.
So it was interesting that, we said talking about going after the individual, and processing through that. But do you think it's gone too far? I mean, it's now the problem has ballooned so much, we can't get a grip on it. I mean, it's example, the numbers from this weekend's, this weekend shootings are astronomical. That doesn't include during the week. It doesn't include the weekend before and the weekend before that, and so all these numbers are adding up. So how do we tackle one at a time when we're this far in?
Yeah, so with that, I think it has to happen both ends. Like it's one of these things where we only can't look at the end result, because if we're only going to go after, if we're only going to address a situation after a shooting has happened, after murder has occurred, we're going to have a lot of people killed and a lot of people shot. So it needs to be, we need the effective enforcement piece. We need effective prosecution. We need effective investigations. But at the same time, the other end, the beginning of that pipeline, there needs to be a lot of work happening to prevent individuals from entering into this pipeline, because if not, we're going to have a constant flow. And as we see, they're younger and younger. We're seeing 10, 11-year-olds participating in carjackings. We're seeing younger and younger individuals, and the interventions that need to occur, the support for interventions isn't where it needs to be.
Right.
And so we're really in this place where we're catching.
Jermaine, right? We know what's at the beginning of the pipeline. Lisette, to your point, you can, if you want to use a grid and map out spikes in violence and arrests, you're going to see the same cycles from one decade to the next. We're at just another moment that looks like another moment that we had a decade ago, right? In different cities, switch the name, Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, Atlanta. We're going through the same cycles over and over again because the solutions that we are relying upon are not working. You cannot close schools. You cannot close mental health facilities. You cannot continue to have healthcare disparities in hospitals and not think that you're going to continue to not have the same problems generation after generation. And so why would we even begin to think that we are going to be able to fix the problem with some kind of Band-Aid programs that are underfunded, that are not supported, and that only can live the lifespan of whomever's in office at the moment, which you might get 4 years, maybe you get 8, right? I mean, think about how short of a period of time that is to actually effectuate lasting change on a widespread scale, right? Because we're still not addressing in any real measure those other disparities and social determinants that we all know about: the poverty, the lack of education, the joblessness. Don't get me started on talking about the draconian immigration policies that affect us all, Black and Brown, because if you are Black and Brown and an immigrant, you are twice as likely to get caught up in a system that is going to chew you up and spit you out.
And Tonya,
it's short-sighted of us to think about this, as Jermaine pointed out, as an endpoint without looking at the continuum of causes.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see, you have mentioned that this is a repetition of many, many years. At this point, at 2022, do you see that we're in a right direction, or trying, or people, even more people trying to push for a better direction?
Here's what I tell you, what is encouraging. Because of technology, the world is flat, right? You've got the mapping project, right? This is what happens on this side of the city, and what does that look like when it's different on the other city at the same address. Because of technology, we are able to share information far faster, far efficiently, and more widespread than ever before. That's a plus and a minus, but in my opinion, it is a positive, because we're able to get these stories out in real time about what's happening as far as solutions, as well as the horror stories that are happening at the same time. Are we moving forward? Of course we are. Every time a child is born, in my opinion, we're moving forward because we have an opportunity to reset ourselves. The younger generation today are more fired up than ever before. And to me, that is a positive. They have tools, they have a different level of urgency, and they have a different level of what they are holding us as the previous generation accountable for, as far as creating and aiding and abetting in the problem making. And so those are things that I find very encouraging, and I do see some movement forward. I could point to things like what happens in Georgia under Stacey Abrams, what happens with, Ocasio on the East Coast. There's so many people that are on the front end of affecting real change and not just speaking to progressive politics. Is there more to be done? Absolutely, because it shouldn't take politicians to do it. We have the resources in our own communities to be able to be mentors, to open up youth clubs right where we are, whether we have the funding from the state or not. Movies in the park. We don't need the park district to do movies in the park, but guess what? If you ask for one, they'll put it in your park, right? So there are lots of things that we can do to start to take back control of our communities if we are willing to have these conversations and then demand the resources that Lisette is talking about in grassroots, community by community, to say we need these resources in order to rebuild our own communities. So I absolutely do see change coming.
And Jermaine, do you see that drive from young people? I mean, you spent a lot of time with them.
Yeah,
and
I think it's one of the
young people, but their families.
Yeah, I think it's an important thing to always understand. If we even think back to the civil rights movement, and we understand a lot of work Dr. King did, so much of that energy came from young people, right? So we understand like that, and Tonya talks about it, like we live this these cycles within the processes. So the great part about youth and energy, right, is that passion and excitement. And here's an awesome benefit too, because we live in this world of technology, the connectability and the interconnections between our up and coming generations is like none before. They're extremely comfortable around people who are different than them. They're extremely comfortable around these different understanding between, different walks of life and nationality and sexuality. They're comfortable with that. And so that's a benefit, and that's an opportunity for us to grow together. And I think the key thing to understand what the optimism, I know for me, what I'm so optimistic about is that the relationships that are built. And so much of our success is dependent upon those relationships and that ability to connect. And so having this opportunity with, working with young people, that becomes this young person, this energy, this vessel of life becomes an in to a family. Like that's the way you get in, right? From this young person who participated in this program, are we just going to stop it here and say, all right, I'm going to teach you this activity, or am I going to take this as an opportunity to build a relationship, not with you, but not only you, but within your family? Am I going to ask mom, dad, cousin, whoever, come on out and participate in this process? That's the sustainability piece, right? That's so vital and so important, because we have to self-actualize the change we want to see within our communities. And it has to come from within, because it won't last unless it is built within the community itself.
Would you say that you know police officers who are also in the same mindset as you?
Yeah, so that's the great part about it, is that we have coaches.
Get to the mic, Jermaine.
So that's the great part about it, is that we have police officers who will participate within Chicago Westside Sports that do this type of work, all the time within communities, right? But here's the tough part about it, is that if we don't intentionally create opportunities for these type of things to happen, they're not going to occur organically, because our nature of our job is we respond to crisis, we respond to 911 calls. And if that's the only thing that we're doing, and we're only dealing with the issues that are in crisis mode, where does that time to create relationship exist? And here's a challenge and the tough part culturally, when we start to think about within the Black community. The makeup of policing, not only just Chicago police, is that, it's a predominantly white institution, right? There's low representation from minorities, extremely low from Blacks. And so what that is that there's a cultural competency that doesn't exist because the lived experiences aren't there. And if we're not creating this opportunity to understand and build relationships with community outside of crisis, outside of 911 calls, how can an officer, how can anyone truly view and understand if they're not allowed to see the beauty, the vibrancy, and it's not just the violence and not just the emergencies? So I think that's an important
advocate for law enforcement living in the communities that they police.
Yeah. And Lisette, I want to go to you.
Yeah.
You spend a lot of time with families, and you also get to see that communication with families and law enforcement. Can you just talk to us a little bit about the process? I've also interviewed people who've had a hard time communicating with police officers and finding information. Would you be able to share what it's been like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's we have taken a break from filming simply because with the turnover of law enforcement, particularly our officers, our detectives in the Chicago Police Department. They're retiring at a high number, they're leaving for other departments. So our families are losing contact with their detectives that are working their case. So we had to stop the filming progress in order to take on a new initiative underneath us, where we are reconnecting the families with whoever the detective is, whoever the new one is coming in. So we've been tasked to do that, but we've also been blessed to do that at the same time, because it has allowed me to have a much more intimate relationship with the families. Not that I never did before, because I'm very big on continuing my relationships with the families as we tell their stories, but also finding their detectives and being able to work hand in hand with the family as they're going step by step through the process. I wish I was as optimistic as my colleagues on here on this panel. I really wish that, and I'm so happy that you guys have that peace of mind. Unfortunately, I am very pessimistic about the situation in Chicago. I think we're beyond the social justice aspect of it. That piece is very important, but now we've reached a point where is morality coming into this? Where is a consciousness with people? Not everybody who pulls that trigger and murders somebody has come from a bad background. We've just got people that, for whatever reason, they decided they wanted to kill that day. So I can't, in a good conscience, say we're going in the right direction when I have hundreds of families who are still grieving their lost loved ones. And not to mention their cases are not solved. And we are continuing the fight on, well, they caught my murderer, but guess what? The state's attorney let him go. We're becoming so soft on prosecution that it's really heinous now. And, you know, like I said before, we're becoming very soft on crime, and we have to really re-look at those things with the people and the powers that be at the table.
And Tonya, for you, you know, what are your thoughts on soft on crime?
Absolutely not. I mean, we haven't even begun to scratch the surface about what we can do and what's possible. To suggest that, you know, social justice is okay, but the time has passed. You know, we haven't even begun to do the work in social justice that we deserve to do in our communities. For as many families that are, you know, still grieving and looking for the right retribution, there are other families who know that incarceration does not work and do not want their child's murderer or, you know, one who committed a crime to be incarcerated, because they know that oftentimes that young person is going to go to prison, not actually be rehabilitated, suffer at the hands of further violence and abuse, and come out and be worse than the way they went in. And so I think there needs to be a growing conversation and space for people who are or have been previously incarcerated, especially as juveniles, as to the type of treatment they received when they went in and the kind of individual and contributing adult they were when they came out. Because oftentimes those two do not mix. And what we often learn in law school does not actually turn out to be the reality, which is incarceration is designed to be able to punish. It is designed to be able to deter future crimes and be able to rehabilitate. We do a really good job of punishment. We do an extremely poor job of rehabilitating and deterring future crimes. And so we have just as many statistics to support the fact that the way that we go about trying to take corrective action is not working. And so at some point we have to say, let's try something different and put the same amount of effort, resources, time, and money behind doing something different that might get different results.
And I want to follow up. Have done that with electronic monitoring, letting the murderers go home after they've been posting I-bond. That can't happen. You can't tell a mother who just saw her dead baby bleeding out on the street, we got to try something different. We're not going to put them in prison. We need to make sure that they're soft on them when they walk in those doors.
I would never attempt to do that. And I think that trivializes not only the death of the infant, but also the mother's response and anyone else's response, because some of the alternatives to incarceration do not trivialize punishment at all whatsoever, and nor do they attempt to absolve or to suggest that there should not be consequences to crime. What we do talk about in the number of murders compared to the number of other crimes that are committed and for which people are incarcerated far outweighs. And so it has to be a holistic conversation. And I would never suggest to any parent or any family that a person who commits a crime not suffer consequences. And that is not what I or others would suggest. What we are suggesting is that the widespread rate of incarceration, the type of way that we enforce the laws disparately in Black and Brown communities, is not improving the lives of the people who live in those Black and Brown communities. So we've got to try something different.
Now, we do have a question from a viewer. I want to read it. Someone said, what could a parent do if their children cases are is a cold case and they don't know who is working on their children's case?
That may be a question for Jermaine.
Yeah, so one of the important things that you can always do is based upon where the incident happened, is that each of our cities kind of separated into areas. So there's 5 areas. And so based on a location, there's a set of area detectives who would have information about your case. So that would be my first, depending on the location of where they are, would be to contact the area detectives for the neighborhood that the individual lives.
But Lisette, as you mentioned, sometimes people can't reach their detective anymore because they moved on.
Yeah. Let me, if I can just add to Jermaine's thoughts, is there's family liaisons in place now that work hand in hand with families affected by violent crimes and homicide. So if you do contact those areas, ask to speak to a homicide sergeant, and they can direct you, or you can also ask for a family liaison person, and they can help find your detective as well. And of course, Case File Chicago is happy to help.
And Jermaine, I also saw you move your eyes when Lisette had mentioned that there was a lack of detectives at this point, police officers.
Yeah, so that's a serious concern that we're facing as a nation with this is following murder of George Floyd, the civil unrest, and a lot of the combination of COVID, like a lot of things has created this shortage of staffing from police agencies. I mean, it's even gotten to the point where, you know, other departments are poaching, you know, from Chicago. They're coming in and like, hey, come here, take a signing bonus. So it's really rough out there from a standpoint of officers. So what it really requires is us to be extremely efficient with the resources that we have. And so I think in the conversation, as you know, I don't think we have to make a choice between effectively serving community social justice and effective prosecution of violent offenders. I think to Tonya's point, to talk about there's a load on the system because typically we utilize criminal justice to address a lot of the ills specifically related to poverty, right? Mental health as well becomes a way in which that is addressed through arrests, right? In situations where individuals should be in a mental health facility or should be in a substance abuse facility, but because those organizations don't exist or are closed or are defunded, right? As we say, because those institutions aren't there, they're now added into the criminal justice system. And that creates a load, right? So how do we effectively address the violence in combination to the mental health related crimes in combination with the poverty crimes? It's a heavy load on the system. And if we were able to alleviate some of these non-violent offenses, we were able to alleviate some of these substance abuse related offenses and be able to then concentrate and focus on violence, right? That could provide, I'm sure that will provide, right, enough, I guess, release of tension on the system to allow us to effectively, with the shortage in detectives, with the shortage in manpower, with the shortage in police officers, to be able to focus on violent crimes. Our officers are dealing with traffic offenses, with traffic control, we're dealing with reporting, like a lot of these things that could be handled by civilians or could be handled by non-sworn members. Officers are taking upon those loads, right, to deal with them. And now how do we then address violence plus all the other things that are going on within the city? And I think it's just too much load on the system to allow us to do both things effectively, which we can.
And Tonya, Lisette, would you say that then it becomes a cycle?
Yeah, I do. And this is where I really see like Tonya's organization, you know, playing a very important role. You know, the work they do is so important and very much needed. And I definitely see where some of that could be, and Tonya, I'm not giving you extra work, but I really see that your organization plays a perfect role for that. What Jermaine was saying is that, you know, give some of that, spread some of it out, you know, for the people that can help. Like Jermaine said, civilians can do some of that work. You know, basic reporting. We don't need to be pulling detectives off, you know, to be doing other things when there's so many cases out there, or pulling tactical officers off their jobs to be doing, you know, traffic offense stuff. So not that anything is less than anything other, but certain roles for certain, you know, people is very important. And again, I think Tonya's organization can take a lot of that role as far as the mental health issues and also dealing with substance abuse and things like that.
So I appreciate the Lisette, and I think there are some of that already in place. It is just woefully underfunded and under-resourced, right? So I talked earlier about, you know, the decline and decrease in mental health facilities, the decline and decrease of so many of our support services, that if you're not actually alive long enough, you won't remember that there used to be mental health hospitals, you know, that were nearby and in your community, because you probably had a family member that was at one of them. You may not be old enough to know that there were transitional homes that were in your community, 2 flats that were funded by the state, that when people got out of a mental health institution, they had somewhere to go to teach them basic living skills before they went back into the community. Places like that are closed for a number of reasons, but one, because of underfunding. So organizations like ours and the others that we fund through Illinois Access to Justice do spend a lot of time in what we call community navigation and community advocacy, where people need resources or education around our legal systems or even quasi-legal systems before they find themselves justice impacted or justice involved. And an ounce of prevention, we know the rest of that adage, right? Helps in a lot of ways. That ties back to an earlier point I made about conflict resolution. If we are relying solely upon law enforcement and our judicial branch to resolve conflicts between people, That means that we are not in relationship with one another. That means I don't know my neighbor next door, let alone the one down the street. And so that is the nexus of how, those disputes that blossom, as Lisette pointed out, and then mushroom into, encounters that might otherwise have been addressed. We have our last civics lesson as 8th graders in the state of Illinois. So we have no idea how to operate and engage within the political system. Who among us went to a grammar school that taught us about how to get along in the sandbox? If anything, it's like so-and-so hit you, you hit them back, right? Such and such bites you, you bite them harder, right? So some of the lessons that we were taught when we were little people in preschool about being kind and compassionate to each other, to Lisette's point about morality, these are social justice tenets, Lisette, right? That say, when do we continue to teach how to get along with one another, how to, good fences make good neighbors, right? How do we get to know one another so that we are holding each other accountable, instead of running to a system that does not work in our favor, that seeks to protect property over people.
So Tonya, it almost seems like taking a step back and starting from the start, or fitting in the puzzle pieces and just trying to get everyone to come in and make an effort towards a change.
But people who have decision-making authority, right? So as I pointed out on this call, we probably only have this much room to do with what we have. I don't sign any budgets that say state of Illinois, Cook County, or Chicago, to be able to have control over where budget line items, how much money is allocated, how many new police.
There's people who are.
But there are people who are, and those are the people that we as the electorate need to hold accountable to making decisions that are in our best interests as community people, and not just in the best interests of elected officials.
So we only have a couple minutes left, but I do want to read one other question that someone asked. They said, how can the local church in the South and West Side be a source of hope in the grassroots efforts? Whoever wants to say something.
I love that question, because oftentimes the church is, pitted against activism and movement making, but especially in Black and Brown communities, the church can often be a place of information, a source of inspiration, a place where people can come together and share ideas and affect change on that grassroots level that Lisette talked about. So certainly not all churches are created equal. I wouldn't begin to suggest churches over mosques or over, temples, right? But there is a space and a place, in my opinion, where faith-based people, where people who, have a divining rod on the inside of them, can come together and fight for the betterment of others. And whatever name you call that in, and what other space you do that in, I think there is a moment of morality that, resonates within all of us, that we do want to be our brother's keeper, that we do want to see each other safe and healthy and happy. So I'm all for it.
Well, that's all the time that we have. Oh, go ahead, Jermaine. Go. You can.
It's going to be super quick.
Say the last word. Say the last word.
It's going to be super quick, but the idea to really for what we need is so important, is this anchor in this way in which we hold value within community. There's a transient nature of leadership, which there's cycle, there's a term, there's limits, people move and they come and go. But for communities to hold those values as a place that as a leader you step into, you must conform to the values within that community. That's what a healthy neighborhood, that's what a healthy city looks like, when the values are stored within community.
Well, thank you all for participating in today's Chicago Tonight Voices, a WTTW News Community Conversation. Be sure to tune in to Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices and Black Voices on Saturdays and Sundays at 6 p.m. on Channel 11. Now, we shared a short form in the chat. If you click it, you can submit ideas, stories, topics, and issues to us that we need to be covering. Please take a moment to fill it out and share your thoughts. And again, join Chicago Tonight Black Voices host Brandis Freeman for next month's community conversation on August 29th at 8 p.m. Thank you again for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your night.